Hello, everyone. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me today. I'm so excited to be here today with Robin Landsong. So I guess we'll start out by having you share what led up to your near-death experience and then going into your near-death experience.
Thank you for asking. So I always like to give context in terms of so many of us who had childhood death experiences, it's because of trauma or violence. And so I always want to get curious to start out with the neglect, and nobody was really paying attention to my well-being or my safety as a child. And I put that in the context of all mammals are designed to take care of their young. So what happened generationally that my parents, maybe their parents, something happened that disrupted that ability to care for their young. So I wasn't really being watched, and I was being exposed actually to a lot of unwell adults. And so one of those spotted me as an unprotected child, and I believe he was a trained military man. This is 1977, so post-Vietnam War. And of course, there's quite a number of soldiers who weren't being supported in integrating back and recovering any psychological wellness. So he spotted me and abducted me. Came and got me at the end of the school day, at the end of the year, and drugged me. And so I can't say exactly how he transported me, whether he just put me in a bag and took me on the airplane. Airplane seats were bigger in 1977. There wasn't the security checks that we have now. And people sometimes kind of wonder, like, how could that happen? And again, 1977, this is totally before Child Protective Services was even developed. And no national system was developed about reporting a missing child until about 1983. So when people ask how could he have possibly gotten through the airport, I say quite easily. So when the drugs wore off and I became conscious again, I didn't know it, but I was in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. It was the height of the Civil War then, and the white government was recruiting around the world, and specifically to former soldiers, to fight their side. So as best as I can put together, I think he was going to be a mercenary in the Rhodesian War. And in his distorted lack of mental wellness, I think he thought I was his daughter and he was taking me with him. And so he was very violent. My life was really in danger every moment. And it's an odd thing to say that it's good that I was already an abuse survivor, because I knew how to cope, I knew how to strategize, and I knew how to watch adults for every little piece that I could to increase my chances of survival. So he assaulted me, broke my ribs on one side, and somebody actually did pull me away from him. I was hospitalized in Bulawayo in Zimbabwe, and just a few days later he came and got me, and no one stopped him. And again, this is the height of the war. People watching out for children is very low on people's priority. And that idea that if he was my father, he would have rights over me. So he took me, and I believe my understanding now is that for recruits that already have military experience, he would have done a 5-day training and then be going into the field. And so he had to get rid of me. And so he gave me to another man. That man took me on a bus. And so the man who abducted me was white, and the man he gave me to was Black African. And the bus broke down. And so we all had to get off and walk. And here I am with broken ribs, my painkillers are wearing off, and so I just can't keep up. And so the group leaves me behind. The man who I was in his care, he leaves me behind, so I'm in the bush by myself. I'm 8 years old, and I don't know that my chances of survival as a child alone in that war are nil. And I actually get picked up by a few hours later. Some of the most dangerous soldiers pick me up, and I think, this is going to be the end of my 8 miserable years. They're all fully armed. It's a military truck, and I think they're just going to shoot me, and this is going to be the end. And it's going to be a relief because I've just had no joy and no freedom to be a child. And so they take me to what's called the Thule block, and I've been able to retrace my steps. And two soldiers have an argument over me. One is wanting to save my life, and the other is wanting to shoot me on the spot. And so my nervous system, I literally the stress of just not knowing, am I going to be alive in a minute, or is this the end? And so I just go unconscious again. It's mercy in the nervous system just to take me out of that moment. So the man who was advocating for my life because I was a child, he won the argument, obviously. And so he took the risk to take me out of there, and he took me to a village he thought was going to be sympathetic to a white child. And it was also right on the border between Zimbabwe and South Africa. And so I have the enemy to thank for saving my life, and kind of one of the more extreme soldiers to thank for taking me out of there. So he drops me off near this village, and again, I can't understand any of the language anyone is speaking to me, but with his gestures, he's kind of nodding towards the village and saying, "Go there, little girl." And so it's dark, I don't know them, I think I hear barking dogs, which might have actually been hyenas off in the distance. And I find a tree, and I climb up in that tree, and I sleep there. And what happened for me there is, even though I'm alone, I'm hungry, I'm free of the abductor, and I'm by myself, and I'm out in nature where I look up at the stars and think, okay, this is the beginning of my heaven. And so in the morning, I can hear the women singing. And I go a little bit closer and I see them, they're grinding something in their pestle and mortar, and they're singing and they're working with the food. And their singing is different than my singing, but it's the same idea of listening to the song in the land and bringing that through. So I'm just going to share a little bit of the joy of their singing. Sheyam ho ho, heyam hayam ho, heyahi, heyayo, ho hayam neyo. So of course I want to go closer to this singing. I want to find out what their joy is. I want to find out what's alive inside them that can make them sing and while they work. And so I go closer and they spot me, and of course they're so surprised to see a white child by herself. And it's the height of the war, and what's happening, it's a war over land and resources. And so there's a lot of kind of foreign white farmers who have taken over a lot of the land. So it's very possible that they believe that my white family had been killed and I was just running and surviving on my own. So I get closer, they set out food and water for me, and eventually I feel safe enough. That evening they set out a sheepskin, a goat skin for me to sleep on. And so in the morning, it's the children who gather around me. I'm less threatened by the children because of course I'm afraid of all adults. And so the children come over and they're touching my white skin, and my hair was more blonde then. And they take my hand and they lead me to a fire circle. And there the eldest girl stands so proud. And she gathers up some of the ash from the fire and she starts putting it on my skin. And what she's doing is she's making me more like them. She's probably never touched or interacted with a white child before because the racism and the division is so intense there. And so she's telling a story, and again, it's in Venda, so I can't understand the translation, but I'm getting the idea that she's storying me in. She's saying, and she came to us from far, she arrived to us here. And again, she's putting more ash on me, and all the children think it's funny, and they start joining in and putting ash on my face and my clothes, and they're making me look more like them. And it's my first experience of belonging. And I've been so lonely in my whole childhood up to this point. But they're telling me I'm part of them. I belong just as they do. And what happens next changes my whole life. One of the women comes, the women who gave me some food and water, and she sits down and she's delighting in all this laughter. And she starts singing. And I'm so taken with her singing. And she's calling me to her. And this song, again, like, how is she so alive? How is she so vibrant? And I want to know what's inside her. So I start going towards her. I don't even notice that the other children go off to play. And as I get closer, I'm starting to feel the aliveness in her filling up the cold loneliness inside of me. And so again, she's singing, Shea ho eh ho eh ho eh hum, hey ya ho eh ho eh ho. And so at each step I get, it's filling up the emptiness inside me. And she's calling me to look her in the eyes. And I don't look adults in the eyes. One, because I don't want their insanity inside me. And two, I don't want anyone to see the shame that's inside me. And so she's calling me and singing to me to look into her eyes, and she's drawing me closer to her. And I'm calculating, like, how quickly can I run if she turns mean? But there's no meanness inside her. And there's this profound mothering. And again, I've come from a family where I was abused and neglected, and so I'm starving for mothering. And she keeps singing, Shuea hiyam, ho ho. And I step in closer, and I move my eyes from her lap to watching her breathe in and out. And then eventually her song is so soothing, I look her in the eyes. And for the first time in my life, I see mothering. And I literally melt in her arms. I let her be my adult. I let her be my shelter. And I just collapse into her loving embrace. And that night I sleep in one of the huts next to her. And I'm holding on to her dress because I just don't want to lose what I've now gained. And so I'm being taught the songs over the next, I think, as best I can put together, I was with them for about a month. And so I'm taught how to plant, I'm being part of, and I'm really forgetting my life before. I forget that I'm white because everyone I see is black. And I'm learning the gestures and the communication. And they have a naming ceremony for me. And their name for me is I. And the greeting for, the greeting for a girl is I, and they name me Shai. So I think my name is Aisha. And I'm really just belonging in, and that this is my new world. And again, I don't know that there's a full war going on. And I go too far from the village one day. And there's a creek where the women had put clay on my ribs to heal my broken ribs. And what happens is that I go to that same creek, and there's a battle getting ready to start in the field next to the village. And one of the soldiers who's scouting the area has a rifle and instantly spots me. And it's too far for me to run back to the village, and I'm just frozen like a scared rabbit. And he's so close that when he pulls up his rifle and it's aiming at me, and his gun barrel becomes just a circle, I know that there's no way for me to escape. And I actually see his fingers pull the trigger. And I'm thinking, if these people are loving me and cherishing me, why can't you see the humanity in me? Why can't you see the good in me? And when he pulls the trigger and I hear the gun go off, I can't believe he doesn't have any love for me. And the bullet grazes the top of my head. I'm blown off my feet, and I hit the ground. And what happens next is that of course my body's in shock. I vomit, and I'm watching the blood roll across the land, and instantly my awareness rises above my body, and I'm looking down, and my body is like a city going into a blackout, like the lights are going out. And I think, if my vitality, if my soul life force doesn't go back into my body, that's the end of me. And so I'm watching, and I can't do anything to bring that life force back in. And so in an instant, my awareness is drawn back down into my body, back through my heart, through an opening, and I'm traveling. And it's so peaceful, and I'm completely free. And I travel very quickly, and the beauty of crossing over is that I no longer have to struggle or fight to stay alive. It's over. I'm being totally held. And when I land somewhere, there's this quietness and this warmth and this brilliance. And when I can focus again, there's two women, and they're there caring for me and touching my face. And when I can focus and see them again, it's my two sisters and the two women who have been like mothers to me from this village. And they're there greeting me. And what I don't know then is that 2 days later, after I'm shot, the soldiers are going to come back, and these two women are going to cross over. But they're already there to greet me, even though they haven't crossed over yet. And so they're showing me this great glowing golden sphere, and that I can go there and I can be welcomed home, fully restored, fully filled up again, and the golden glowing sphere won't be diminished at all. But I think, I want to show my new family this beautiful place. And so my attachment to my new African family, I don't go into the golden glowing sphere, and I'm going to go look for them. And so that sends me backwards into another realm, and I fall backwards so gently. And when I land, I'm in a darker place, and it's sort of like Ireland on a cold day. And I'm in these stone stairs, and I think, I had it better before. It was warm and glowing, and it's kind of damp and cold, and there's these staircase next to me. And they're worn down, and I think this place must be important because so many people have walked down those stairs that the stairs are worn down. And this man appears next to me out of I don't know where he comes from, but he's offering his hand to help me up. And I'm independent, and I don't want help, and I just want to be on my own. But eventually I have to accept his help because it's kind of slippery, and I'm very weak. So he helps me stand up, and he's guiding me. We're going to walk down these stairs, and I don't know who he is, and I don't necessarily trust him. But I feel so weak, and so I do take his hand. I do start to go down these stairs, and there's something dripping, and I think it's rain from above, but it's actually blood from my head. And I'm panicked, and he's showing me yes, let's keep going, walking down these stairs. So we walk into this dark cave, and I think, I definitely had it better before. And the importance of this dark cave, with him guiding me through every step, is that I'm being shown all the adults who had abused me in my 8 years. And all the repressed emotion and screams are kind of bouncing around in this cave. So everything that I need to purify is being presented to me. And I want to run, and I want to avoid it. And he's right there with me. And in a moment, I see myself through his eyes. And there's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing that made the abusers choose to harm me. And I all of a sudden forgive myself for being abused and realize it was never my fault. It was the confusion and the misguidance of the adults. So with that clarity, I'm through my dark cave and come out the other side. And there's living stars. And we step out into this cliff, and I ask him, right from my heart to his, where are we going next? And I realize he could go anywhere. And he came there to guide me through my dark cave, through my confusion. And he's showing me that we're about to jump off this cliff and just become birds, like that we can fly through the night sky. So with my total faith in him, I put my hands in his and we jump off the cliff together. And we're gliding through the night sky and we separate, and he's showing me this is dying. And I think, well, if this is dying, then it's peaceful, totally held, and fully guided. And so he starts to part paths with mine, but again, I see the golden glowing sphere, and it's huge, even bigger than it was before. And kind of in my mind, he tells me, go there. But again, I'm still attached to my African family. So when he parts paths with mine, I start looking around, and I want to tell them all about this experience. And so I see a field, and I think maybe they're down there. So I land myself in the field, and I start looking for them, and I become panicked that maybe they're hurt and they're down and something has happened to them, and I have to find them to help them. And so I run and I search and I can't find them, and I finally fall down and crying. And when I'm cleared out from my crying, my grief, I hear this rustling, this voice. And I go to that voice, and there I meet a being who is so peaceful. And his voice and his presence just clears out my grasping for my family to be back to what I knew. And he reminds me just by his presence that I belong to the collective family, this greater well-being of family. And he has a beard and a narrow face, and he's wearing a robe that's like a felted fabric, and he has a sheep herder staff. And what happens next is that his face starts changing, and it changes into a lion. And I'm so delighted by this. I think, I want to show this to Atto, one of the men who was so good to me in the village. And then his face changes to Atto. And my heart lights up with all my love. And then the face changes again to somebody I don't know. And my heart is still full of love. And I realize I'm more capable of love than I realized. And what he's doing by having his face change is showing me it's not the form that matters. It's this ability for ourselves to be engaged and see another being and love equally. So he bends down and he touches his forehead to mine, and again I can see as he sees. And this huge universal matrix of living connection, like we're each a gem in this spiderweb matrix. And that, every mountain, every tree, frog, living thing is connected in this matrix. And I realize I'm never alone, and it's just about remembering how we belong. So he comes back and he stands up, and my faith in him is absolute. And so I say again, where are we going next? And he opens his heart. And I realize if I lean myself into his being, I'm going closer to the source that made him, closer to the source that made me. And so I just open up and lean myself in, and we travel through this tunnel of light. And he has one more piece to show me, this important piece. And so we come out from that tunnel and we're above where my body is. And I'm looking down, and my African mama has found my body, and she's pulled my lifeless body up into her lap. She's stopping the blood flow, and she's wailing into the sky. And I want to tell her I'm totally okay. I'm pain-free. I'm held here as my guide, and we're going to rise up and go to even greater freedom, go home to my source. And so I start rising up, and this this drawing behind me is my drawing to honor her as my mama, as my kind of refuge, as my turtle. That there's the great creation story that the world was created on the back of a turtle. So I drew her as a turtle, and my world rested on her back. And you can see Africa is on there.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And so I rose up, I was going closer to home, and all these beings were purifying me, meeting me. But what happened is that as I continued crossing over and was getting closer to going back to what I call the Great Heart, my original source, is that my mama had changed her wailing into singing. And then I perceived that she was calling on the ancestors to add to her song. And when I heard that, and again, my singing is different than her singing, but I'll just give it a try. So when I heard this calling song, I remembered I hadn't done my purpose, which was also to join the choir of medicine singers. There's so many of us who are there to sing at birth and sing at death and sing to call people home to themselves, just as she was doing for me. So I turned around and came back. And when I was at the final veil between the living and the dead, I met what I believe is the grandmother of all of us, the grandmother of all races. And she sang inside me and she said, it's going to be so difficult when you go back. There's going to be so much more loss and harm. But what I want you to remember is that you always belong here. And when you go back, sing to others to help them remember their belonging also. So with that, I returned to my body and I came back into, I felt the pain again. And of course, like so many near-deathers, question like, ooh, did I make the right choice? I had so much peace and love on the other side. But my mama was holding me and people from the village had come and they were carrying me back and they were singing prayer songs to get the hatred from the bullet off my head. And they took me in a hut and they put plants on me to clear away the pain and they cared for me. And like I said earlier, about 2 days later, and of course there's no hospital nearby, there's no medical care. So it was just their care that kept me alive and their prayers. And the soldiers came back and they attacked the whole village. And one of the other mothers, I was with her in a hut. And when the shooting stopped and she thought it was safe to escape, she put me on her hip and we started to run. And apparently the soldiers had not left. And so the bullet came from behind her and shot her and we both went down. And so I hit the ground hard, started the bleeding again. And I did my best to try and drag her with me, but I'm 8. I had just died of blood loss 2 days earlier, so I'm incredibly weak. And she's yelling at me to go. She's never yelled at me. And she's yelling at me, just go, go. And so I follow her instructions and I stop trying to pull her with me. And I run, and I don't make it too much further. And I've had the privilege of going back and retracing my steps. So I now see I was running down a little bit of a sandy hill. So again, the blood loss had started again, and I fell down face forward in this sand and had a second death experience. And when I crossed over, it was entirely different, and it was a blank landscape, and there was somebody singing to me. And the song was very simple, you will live, you will live. And it was to the sound of Three Blind Mice, which I trusted whoever was singing it to me, because the kindest thing my brother ever did for me was read me the whole set of Three Blind Mice when I was very sick in bed by myself. So I instantly trusted whoever was singing. And I wanted to know who's singing to me. And so they brought me closer. And through this veil, I could see this blue being, this masculine person. His skin was kind of a deep purple blue. He had a black bun on the top of his head. And he was still singing this, you will live. But he stopped the song and then showed me a vision of a record that was kind of like off the record player. And it was very deeply scratched. And I thought, well, this record should be thrown away. It's damaged. And he said, no, you shouldn't be thrown away. The broken places are how I recognize you. And that's where I let the love enter into you. So he was telling me, even though I had all this woundedness, all this trauma, that the broken places are where divinity lets the love and the light into us, and where also our gifts can shine forth in the world. So he began to show me that out of destruction comes new creation. So he's showing me these two land masses colliding together, crushing up and making a new mountain. And then he was showing me the mountain, grain by grain, landslide, coming down to make the beach. And he said, shall we destroy the beach so you can have shall we destroy the mountain so you can have the beach? And I said, I don't like the destruction part. Can I just have the warmth of the beach and the beauty of the mountain? And he said, when things get broken apart, when it looks like all is lost, something new is being created. These new ingredients will go into something. And he was telling me, even though I just lost everyone I loved in that massacre, that somehow, someday, something good was going to come of it. And so he was going to return me back to life because I was part of that something good. So he returned me back to my body. And again, I'm only not that far from everybody who's been shot. This is Africa. Animals are going to come. So he's commanding me to crawl forward away from the massacre. And he's commanding me to crawl forward towards a well where somebody might come for water in the morning. So every inch, it's his will, not my will, that I'm going forward. And in the morning, a woman that I now know her name is Mia Lucy came to the well to get water. And she found me half dead, washed the blood off my face, wrapped me on her back like I was her baby, and took me back to her homestead. And again, I now know from her granddaughter that when other people saw she had a wounded white child, they said, don't bother with her, it's too dangerous. Because the white government could have accused her of abducting me, and the most extreme soldiers would have accused her of siding with the enemy. So she hid me every day. She had the other medicine singers come and sing I was blind in one eye. Of course, I had a brain injury. I was very feeble, couldn't walk by myself, but she and her granddaughter hid me every day. Eventually, they took me across into South Africa and gave me to the closest white farming family who said, we'll find her family, assuming that I was either Zimbabwean or South African. And so they took me in. I started to die again from infection and brokenheartedness, loneliness. Because when I was in Zimbabwe, I was being sung to and touched and slept next to and cared for and just had a sense of belonging. When I went to South Africa and its apartheid and its whites only division, I wasn't being touched. I wasn't being sung to. I was being fed, and there was running water and plenty of food, but I wasn't being loved in the same way. So I began to die, and they took me to a hospital in Polokwane, South Africa, where I was given antibiotics, and they saved my physical life. But again, it was whites only. I was definitely not being touched there. Eventually, I told them who my parents were, and an agent from South Africa attended me on a flight back to the US, back to the East Coast. When I got back in my family, and I tried to speak of this, my mother, again, a culture, family of secrets, of silence, of avoidance, of not being able to speak about difficult things. She hit me across the face and said, don't ever speak of this again. And so I didn't. I pushed it back down. I totally repressed it and lived through all the years of abuse until I got out to go to college. When I got to college, all of it came bursting forth. The post-traumatic stress, my nervous system was just totally overwhelmed. And I was actually going into episodes of more death. because my body was so shut down, so on the edge of life, that when I had the traumatic memories come up as nightmares, my body's response was to cross over again. So I had to be resuscitated by the AED machines again. So I've actually had several more death experiences, but those are the two kind of most extreme. All the others are from the trauma response. And so I spent my whole young adult life doing my trauma resolution work. Really, just that was my top priority. Doing so many body healing sessions, so much therapy, so much movement practices. And at a certain point, I was able to start giving back. When I was about 35 or so, I went to massage school, got lots of training, have continued my training in nervous system healing, polyvagal, because I really love to give back and help other people see that trauma isn't their fault. Their trauma response is a normal mammal response, and guide people in their trauma recovery. They're decreasing the shame, increasing self-compassion, because it's so incredible to have ourselves for our own lives and to be able to share our gifts with the world. So that's why I really love people, helping them in their recovery and helping other near-deathers kind of integrate and make meaning of their experience, because that's the key. Is the gift isn't necessarily in the trauma, it's in the trauma recovery. And who we become as we do our healing practice, that's when we polish the gem. That's when we show up in our strengths. And the trauma can break us open to know what we're made of, and the healing process can make it so we can give that forth to others.
Wow, I love what you said there, that the gift is in the trauma recovery. Because a lot of times people will ask, well, why did I have to go through that trauma? Why is that the only way that I could have gotten the good out of life or out of that situation? But what you're saying is it's the process of recovery.
Mm-hmm. Because so often if people don't do their recovery, they're so numb, they're shut down, they don't know how to relate to other people, relate to themselves, to their body. So much of what I teach, the core, of course, is embodiment and coming home to sensation, shifting from avoiding to turning towards ourselves, towards the difficult emotions, so that eventually we can come into self-compassion. Because then when we're in self-compassion, we can be in compassion for others and then radiate that in the world, which is, of course, so needed. And rather than be so reactive, you know, if we perceive we're insulted or perceiving someone isn't understanding us, or especially for more masculine people, if they perceive someone isn't trusting them, there's that reactivity, which can actually lead to violence. And so when we do our trauma work, we are increasing peace in the world, because we've shifted from really being so subjected, like, to any trigger, over into being able to stay steadier and say, oh, it isn't about me, or oh, that's that person's trauma response. And how can I actually be in compassion for them to de-escalate the response in their nervous system?
Right. Well, I want to thank you for not only sharing your experiences with us, but also for singing for us. Something I've always wanted to ask you since I first heard about your experiences. I was just so captivated by the tribe that you lived with and how they were so loving and joyful and nurturing. And it just seems like a little bit of heaven on earth, and maybe what we all want, what we all wish the world was like. Do you think it's possible for us to get to that point collectively?
So much. And of course, you know, I'm in the middle of a war, so there is hatred. And so the pieces I'm kind of bringing forth are the places I did get my needs met. You know, of course, I was shot by a soldier, and so, you know, there's strife and selfishness or greed in every culture. And where I also like to put in things in context is the generations of oppression and racism that's happening, you know, around the world in different places. So what I love about teaching self-compassion and therefore being able to be compassionate with others is, like you just said, creating heaven on earth in our relationships, and then having that ripple out to our institutions, to how the governments make decisions. So of course, Rhodesia and then Zimbabwe, they've been run by a dictatorship, who won that war was a dictator for the next 40 years. So the poverty, the continued racism in that place was intense, and the economic disparity. So again, I love to come back to every single person who can contribute to their trauma resolution can show up in the world to contribute to heaven on earth. And when we can spread that to our education systems, to how we raise children, instead of teaching them to be numb or be too fast-paced or be checked out on electronics, by teaching them movement, teaching them coming home to their body, teaching them how to turn towards their emotions. And more skill building in our next generation is going to make it so there's less racism. When we can deeply see another human being, that's when the making somebody else other is going to decrease. And I recently am about to graduate from a training through Stanford on compassion and altruism. And one of the key things I learned there is that empathy is turning towards difficulty, our own or somebody else's. And so that's the first stage in noticing the suffering in the world. And then what needs to happen to get from empathy over to compassion, which is taking action to relieve the suffering or increase the well-being of the other person or ourselves, is we need to decide, one, we can tolerate staying with the difficulty. We can keep turning towards the problem. So therefore, if our capacity to stay with difficulty is higher because our nervous system is better, we're going to be able to show up to solve the world's problems better. The other key to getting to compassion is deciding this group or person or issue, animal, is worthy of my compassion. And so that's where racism comes in. If somebody has been brought up, or whatever reason has gotten distorted thinking, to think this person is less than or doesn't deserve my compassion, it stops there. The person never receives the loving kindness that we have the potential, especially our spiritual potential, to offer to all beings. And that can be a tricky phrase for some people, because what about people who do harm? What about people who have committed crimes? And for myself, I have to get to the really big spiritual picture to hold compassion for them, of what disturbance happened along the way in their development that they got so off center. Because I believe, and so many other people too, that we're designed for relationship. We're designed to give and receive love. And so what happened that somebody thinks power over another human being by harming them is going to get them love or get their needs met? That's really distorted thinking. And that the more harm they do, the more power, misaligned power they have to exert to try and perceive that they're doing okay, or that power is going to get their needs met, when the core of it is everybody wants loving kindness. Everybody wants to be deeply witnessed and seen for who they are.
Thank you so much, Robin. Thank you for sharing your story and your wisdom. And I'd like to give you a chance to talk a little bit more about everything that you do, if there's more you'd like to say. I know you also do art.
Yeah, so I draw. That's one of the gifts from my near-death experience, I was shown that I'm going to have all these drawings to do. And again, they're all really about reminding people that we all belong to our maker, to our source. And that even if we've messed up, we can still come back to that belonging and begin again. So the art comes through me. It's really divinely guided. And I do, obviously, the singing medicine to help people heal. And I'm working on creating a upcoming docuseries that's going to be about interviewing people who have been through really intense things and how do we heal. Because I want to show people that there's so many paths of how people can heal. Like psychotherapy is one, but there's this huge broad spectrum, especially culturally, about how people can heal. So there's that. My book is going to be upcoming, and I've been working on that book for 14 years, so I'm really looking forward to getting it out in the world. So that shares my experiences and my near-death experiences in detail. And currently, I do 5-person groups. People can sign up through my website. Once I'm fully into the filming for the docuseries, I'll probably have to take a little break from that. But I also teach self-criticism to self-compassion, which I think is a skill, of course, everybody could benefit from, of just how do we be kinder to ourselves so we can be kinder in the world.
Absolutely. If you have any of your art that you'd like to send to me, I can put it up on the screen during editing. Or I think you said in another interview I was listening to that you had some art that showed what happened in your near-death experience. I can put that up while you're describing it if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Robin. I've really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you making time for this. I know you have a lot going on right now.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. These are great because then it actually gets out to people.
Yeah.
And it just started snowing. And of course, that's why it got dark and my lighting is all shifting. So.
Oh, well, I didn't notice the change in the lighting, so that's good.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing your thing. I know it's a piece of work to do the podcast and the editing. So.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I'm honored to have you on.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah. You have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.